welcome you all to Trek Wars. Today on Trek Wars, we will be reviewing the USS Curry class. The USS Curry class, NCC-42256, was a 24th century Starfleet vessel that fought with the Second Fleet during the war with the Dominion. The Curry was unusual in that it was assembled from parts taken from different classes to meet the threat posed by the might of the Dominion. The saucer and engineering hull of the Curry were the same as those used on the Excelsior class. However, the secondary hull was moved much further forward and the connecting to the middle of the saucer section rather than the back. This meant that the front of the engineering hull extended out well beyond the front of the saucer, giving this ship a very distinct profile. It's also noted that the ship used parts from Miranda-class starships. Another significant feature of the Curry class was that the shuttle bay and the shuttle bay doors had been moved from the rear of the engineering hull as they had been on the Excelsior class to the front. The warp nacelles and pylons on the Curry class were very similar in shape and style to those found on the Miranda class, a type of ship that had first entered service over 100 years earlier. Despite their aging look, the nacelles were fitted with more advanced propulsion technology and were capable of propelling the ship to a top speed of warp 9.6 for a short period. In fact, although the different elements that made the Curry came from classes that had been in service for some considerable time, many of the systems have been upgraded to late 24th century specifications. For example, the sensor systems had been upgraded, while the armament, which included 10 phaser emitters and 2 photon torpedo launchers, had also been modified. This later feature was of a particular importance given the situation that the Federation had found itself in after first contact had been made with the Dominion in 2370. A state of Cold War had developed the following: the destruction of the USS Odyssey, the Jem'Hadar. From that point on, many thought it was only a matter of time before the Dominion would invade the Federation. Realizing this, the Federation needed warships, and they needed them now. So to get an understanding, this is kind of deceptive, is that these are not actually Miranda-class engines, because they are obviously way too big. But these are actually using the Miranda-class engine design specs because they're easier to produce than, more modern engines. But they still have some more upgraded or modern parts. But they actually took like some of the coils from the old Mirandas and then they introduced them into this design. So basically they're scavenging parts in order to increase production rates. So that's one of the really interesting things about this ship is it does talk about being a hybrid, and technically it is a hybrid, but most of the technology in this ship is actually modern. So the Federation was aware that the Dominion liked to use these bug ships as their main, offensive weapon. And they were aware of how incredibly powerful the Dominion bug ships really were. And they, in order to counter this, because Federation ships are pretty large and unmaneuverable for the most part, they were going to use fighters. And so we need something to carry the fighters. And there weren't very many ships that are out there that could carry fighters. And so the idea behind this ship is it's a full combat vessel, but it's also got a secondary role of carrying fighters for additional support. And so when you look at the hull of this ship, so let's go ahead and let's kind of like evaluate and take a look at the hull itself, and let's kind of understand what they're doing and why it's the way it is. So you can see that they had enlarged the shuttle bay and put it in the front so they could launch fighters quickly. So the internal structures are pretty much empty inside of this ship. So most Federation starships have very advanced sensor equipments, they have laboratories and all kinds of other facilities. They are non-existent on this ship. This ship is designed to fight and deliver fighters. It has no other purpose. It doesn't have advanced sensors. It's got just the bare bones of what it needs to get into combat. This ship is basically a combat vessel. So its internal structure is capable of carrying at least 2 wings of fighters. Now, when you research wings, I'm not exactly sure how many fighters it is. Based on what I see, I believe that this ship is capable of holding 16, and that there are 8 per wing. And so that can be your runabouts, or it could be your paramount fighters. So you have your choice between the Federation fighter, which I don't honestly remember what the name is, or you can choose the runabout. So the runabout is the more powerful of the two. So when you look at these two vessels and you compare them, the runabout has better shielding. It can be optimized to have better weapons. A standard runabout has a micro torpedo launcher, and it uses Type 6 phasers, which isn't very impressive. But you can also use the variants that have the special module, which makes them be able to equip Type 10 phasers on the runabouts, which we see Odo do during Deep Space Nine. Those are costly, and most of the fighters that you're going to be bringing in are going to be the Paragon, I believe what the actual name is, Federation fighters. And they are equipped with decent weapons. They have a Type 6 phaser. They have 2 Type 8 phaser cannons, as well as a load of torpedoes. So they can carry a large payload for a vessel of its size. All right, so now let's look at the full offensive capabilities one Curry class could have with the Paragon fighters. So it's got 2 torpedo tubes, and it technically has 20 Type 9 phasers. So there's 10 dual phaser banks, and it has 16 torpedo tubes that are coming from the Paragon fighters or the Federation fighters. It also has 16 Type 6 phasers, and then this is where most of the weaponry is coming from, 32 Type 8 phasers. Now, it's also noted that, yes, these are using micro torpedoes as well, but they could also be using standard photon torpedoes, because the ship is capable of carrying photon torpedoes underneath its wings, and it can carry 4 torpedoes. So that's a lot of offensive capabilities that these fighters are bringing to the battlefield. All right, so now let's think about what we would be doing if we were using, 2 wings of runabouts. Now, fully loaded runabouts with Type 10 phasers, which means that these ships are running the offense module. That means that they're going to be bringing enough firepower that it's almost like having a Galaxy-class starship with you. I mean, your primary ship, it's got 2 torpedoes, obviously. It's got 20 Type 9 phasers. We're having 16 micro torpedo launchers, and then you're having 32 Type 10 phasers. That is an enormous amount of, attack potential, but in my opinion, it's probably not the best way to optimize your Type 10 phasers, because those are very, very expensive phasers, time consuming to construct. They take a lot of energy, a lot of power, a lot of resources. They're better put on capital class starships than on runabouts. I mean, yes, if you're in a situation where you have to fight the Jem'Hadar and this is what you're doing, then I could see how they would be effective against the Jem'Hadar bug ships, because those ships are fast and maneuverable, and these can, flank and get around to those weaker shielded areas that the bug ships have. Also, with Type 10 phasers, they would also be able to take on, obviously Hideki class ships, and they could probably win. Okay, so remember, modularity is the specialty for the runabout. That's its primary source. So, there has different type of modules, and we're going to kind of talk about different modules, because I think using the different modules is probably better. So, if you guys are familiar with Deep Space Nine, this is one of the reasons why Deep Space Nine was given runabouts that was brought to them by the Enterprise, was because they do have these module pods. So there's a cargo pod, there's a medical pod, there's a sensor pod, and then there's a combat pod. Now, when you have these different pods, it obviously increases different attributes of the ship. So these ships are strong. Like, they're a good ship, just, standard. They have a lot of shielding, for a ship of their size. You can carry a lot of troops on them. They're multi-purpose. So they're good for attacking. They're fast and maneuverable. They can carry troops. On the other hand, when you look at the fighters, You only have like a 3-man crew. They can't really carry, troops aboard, but you somewhat get better offensive capabilities, honestly, with the fighter than you do the runabouts, because not all runabouts have this special module for attack. Only some of them are going to have this, and honestly, it's expensive because if you think about you're putting Type 10 phasers on a little tiny ship like that, and Type 10 phasers are an expensive weapon to produce and are only on Federation state-of-the-art ships. All right, so there are a few different kind of variants of this ship kind of doing the exact same thing. Just so you know, they pretty much all have the exact same specifications, but it really doesn't matter how the engines are, either on their side or laying down. It doesn't really matter. So if you see some other ships and other designs, they are out there. They're pretty much identical. So let's kind of talk about the actual ship itself. Now that we have an understanding what its main purpose is, yes, it's a carrier. That's primary purpose. But this ship is actually for combat as well. And so let's talk about that. Okay, so right at the back, we see the crew is 290. That's really low for a ship of this size. So there's a lot of automation that they put into the ship when they were constructing it. Now, with its Type 9 phasers and its torpedo tubes, it's going to be 617,000, which is pretty decent. That's a medium class offensive capabilities. Its shielding is going to be 1,040,000, and then it's going to have a hull value of 903,846. So it gives overall defensive value of 1,943,846. So right off the bat, you can see that this ship offensively is decent. The ship can hold its own. It can definitely take out a Jem'Hadar fighter on its own. Should have no problem. Taking 2 or 3, it's going to run into maybe a situation. But this ship can actually hold its own pretty well. Now, the only thing that I have to say about the layout of the weaponry is the ship is not really expected to go front line combat. It's to be in the back and launch its fighters. But if something gets past the front line, it's capable of defending itself, but there are some serious limitations, and that would be the weapons themselves and where they're located. Because of the unusual design, yes, it's got its torpedoes, can shoot from long range, but unless the ships are actually above them, it can't really get very good firing arcs. It can fire somewhat, but because of the engines and then the cells and everything, its firing arcs on the bottom. Because remember, this is an Excelsior, saucer section. It's blocked off. It has really, really poor underneath firing arcs. Almost non-existent because of the way it's shaped, which is a huge liability. And I don't really know why they did this or why it's like this, because most Federation starships do have single banks that are on the engines and then on the ends of the ship, which would have been smarter. I honestly think that they just didn't have time to deal with it, because this ship honestly is not supposed to be in front-end combat, and then the weaponry is kind of secondary. Now, if you were to compare this to some of the other hybrid ships, it's definitely better than them in every way possible. Like when you look at the Jaeger is just something that they put together just to have an additional ship. It's using 100-year-old weapons, Type A phasers. At least we're using modern weapons on this ship. All right, so if we compare to some of the ships that are out there, we know that this ship is using more modern technology. So our ships that would have been built in the 24th century, this is the technology that's being used on this ship. So, modern Type 9 phasers, modern warp cores, modern shielding. This ship is a modern ship. Now, it's not state-of-the-art. It's not using Galaxy-class level technology, but it's underneath Galaxy-class level technology. So the technology on this is probably the predecessors to the Galaxy-class technology. It's going to be somewhere around there. And I kind of think about ships that would be in this category of the same kind of like weaponry or compatibility would probably be somewhat pretty close to the offensive capabilities and, weapon strength that you would see on maybe something like an Ambassador class. Okay, so now let's talk about ship performance. So in a fleet situation, this ship is going to be in the rear guard and it's going to be used as a support ship. Now, remember, it doesn't have the ability to carry troops. Everything is being dedicated to the fighters. It launches those fighters. Those fighters are going to be used as its primary offensive capabilities. Now, the ship is launching the fighters. It's going to stay in the back of the fleet, and it's going to honestly just be rear guard. And the only reason it has the weapons that it does is because they don't want to waste the resources trying to protect this ship, so it's got to be able to protect itself. So the way to think of this is a medium cruiser hybrid carrier. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the exact specifications. So the length is 383.41 meters. Its width is 195.64 meters. Its height is 148.50 meters. Its mass is 1,270,000 metric tons. So it's about half the weight of a standard Excelsior class starship, even though it is made from the same parts and everything. I remember the ship is pretty much hollow. There's next to nothing inside of the ship. The ship is there for weapons. It's got sensors that have been upgraded that are for tactical use. It doesn't have long range sensor capabilities. It can't map things. It's very limited what it can do. Its job is just to bring the fighters to the front lines. Now, when it comes to the Dominion War itself, this ship is probably one of the most important ships that the Federation had in their fleets because of the fighters that it brought. Because the fighters are going to be really good at countering your Jem'Hadar fighters. They're going to be really good at harassing Galors because they don't have very good targeting sensors. And then it's going to really, the only thing that's going to be out there that's going to be dangerous to this ship is the Cardassian Hidikis. Because the Cardassian Hidikis, they do have, better, more sophisticated sensor systems, and they're kind of built for that role. But bringing enough fighters to harass enemy fleets is so incredibly important to the Federation because the Federation doesn't really have small ships. It is very reliant on medium and large ships, which is a huge disadvantage when you're dealing with the Jem'Hadar. So if I was in charge of a Curry class, how would I be setting them up? So remember we have 2 wings, and each wing has 8 fighters, or 8 possible fighters. So how I would set this up is the first wing would be nothing but the fighters. My second wing would be full of runabouts. But I wouldn't have just standard or just complete offensive runabouts. I would have a mixture between medical, sensor, cargo, and offensive. And the reason that why I'd be doing that is because the ship's internal structure is extremely limited, they don't really have, I don't even know if they even have a medical bay on the ship. So we want to obviously have a medical bay. So we would use one of the runabouts for that purpose. And then the deep space sensor situation, because we know that the ship itself is got targeting sensors, but it doesn't have long range sensors because they didn't bother to put them in because the ship is just going directly into combat. So if we need long range sensors, we can use the sensor packet on one of the runabouts to compensate for that. Now, and then I would just have 2 that have the specialized Type 10 phasers. And the reason that I'd be doing that is I would use those 2 not in a combat situation. I wouldn't send them to the front lines. I would use those to defend the ship because we know that it's got a lot of weaknesses when it comes to the lower end of the starship. And so we could use those runabouts, the Type 10 phasers, to defend the bottom of the ship. Now, I would just use the other 4 runabouts as just standard, stock runabouts. The offensive capabilities won't be that great, but they would be good for transporting troops. And especially during the Dominion War, troop transport would be a really important thing because we know that there's inhibitors that were constantly being used, stopping people from being able to transport up and off the planets and stuff. So we would definitely need troop transports. And so these ships would be able to actually rely that. So one thing to remember is the Curry class doesn't have very much crew on it. Almost all of its resources are dedicated to the fighter wings. So those runabouts would have to be beaming troops onto them, and then from other starships, then transporting them to whatever target they would need to be dropped off at. That would be the most optimized way to use this ship, in my opinion. Yes, a lot of people would want to use just strictly the most, best we have, but from a resource perspective, you should be putting, in my opinion, Type 10 phasers on large capital class ships and not using them on smaller ships. Because yes, these ships do have good shielding, but they're still pretty easy to destroy. So I know that some of the other variants like this, like one of the what we call the Intrepid variants. This one is the Intrepid Constitution variant, and it has Type 10 phasers. So I really don't think that it's a good idea to take Type 10 phasers, which should be placed on Galaxy-class starships and other starships, and then placing them on, these kind of lower quality, kind of crappy ships. And I also don't think they should be having Type 8 phasers, which, in my opinion, at that point, are pretty useless against an enemy like the Jem'Hadar. I really think that the Curry class is that really good medium that you need from a hybrid ship, and I would say it is by far the best hybrid ship that we've seen with the hybrid fleets. But like always, that's my opinion. I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think that these ships should be given brand new state-of-the-art cores and upgraded with Type 10 phasers? Do you think they should save the Type 9 phasers for other ships? These should have just had Type 8 since they're sitting in the back anyways. I mean, everyone can have a different opinion. What do you think? Do you guys like the Curry? So I want to clarify something. So when you hear that it says that its sensors were upgraded to 24 sensory levels, they're talking about their targeting sensors. So targeting sensors and then long-range sensors are completely different, separate components. Most ships that were fighting in the Dominion War, basically what they did is their weapons were enhanced, their shielding was enhanced, and their targeting systems are enhanced. All other features on the ship were completely neglected. Some of the ships didn't even have crew quarters. Some of the ships didn't even have medical facilities. Some of the ships, they obviously had no holodecks and things of that nature. They were just complete and utter bare bones. Most of these ships in the internal structures were seriously, literally hollow. And then we get that from the Deep Space Nine manual. All right, so I hope you guys have enjoyed taking a look at the Curry class. I think that the history and the background of it was really thought out. I think it's a really cool idea. I really like how it has strengths and weaknesses. It's kind of got this different mold and weird history. I think it's probably one of my favorite ships now that I've learned about the history of it. So these are the specifications that I have learned. And now if you guys have any ideas or thoughts about this ship, if you think otherwise, my opinion is this ship is a hybrid mobile carrier. Thank you for watching Trek Wars. If you like this material, please subscribe and make a comment. And with that being said, victory is life.